where you are.
And as folks join us, I'm going to welcome everyone to our CHAOSS meeting and do a little housekeeping before we get underway. So my name is Madison Rodman. I work for Minnesota Sea Grant, and you may have noticed today we're using a Zoom platform. So we ask that you'll stay muted and with your video off during our presentations today. We'll have time for Q&A, and then we offer you to turn that video back on, and either when you have a question, you could verbally ask it or type it in the chat. You might also notice that you're seeing live transcriptions across the bottom of your screen. Those can be adjusted. You can make the size bigger, smaller, or make them disappear by clicking on a rectangular icon on the bottom of your screen that says CC, and that should give you some options for your closed caption needs. Also, it's automatically done, so it might not be perfect, but bear with us. We will be recording today's meeting. It'll be an hour and a half, and we'll be sharing that once it's ready to go as well. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Melanie, but thank you. And if you do have any technical questions today, feel free to put that in the chat, and I will make sure to help you as I can. But welcome and to our CHAOSS meeting.
Well, good afternoon. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day in summer. Thank you so much for joining us for our summer CHAOSS meeting. We have an exciting lineup of speakers today. First off, we're going to learn more about the Digital Coast. We're going to get to learn more about what we mean by Digital Coast and what that means, what some of those resources that are available to us. And then we're going to learn more about efforts to restore Saxon Harbor over in Wisconsin after suffering extensive storm damages, and what are some of the lessons from that project that can apply to our own work. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start off with our speakers from the Digital Coast. So we are very pleased to have two speakers joining us from NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. The first is Brandon Crumwitty. He is a physical scientist at NOAA's Office for Coastal Management and serves as the Great Lakes Regional Spatial Coordinator. He's located here in Duluth, Minnesota. His work is focused on utilizing remote sensing and geospatial data for analysis and application to address coastal issues and provide solutions. Also joining us today is Rebecca, better known as Becky Nicodemus. She is an environmental scientist and serves as the Great Lakes Learning Services Coordinator. She's located in Chicago, Illinois, and her work focuses on coordinating and providing learning services and technical support to our Great Lakes coastal stakeholders, with a focus on coastal resilience and nature-based solutions. So without further ado, we're going to turn things over to Becky and Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us today. And just to let everyone know, we're going to hold questions until both of our speakers are finished. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Melanie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you about the Digital Coast. So Brandon and I are happy to be here with you. I'm a regular joiner of this meeting. We're going to start with two questions for you, a poll question gauging your familiarity with the Digital Coast. So that should pop up soon. And oh, there it is. So there's 4 answers. How familiar are you? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, I've heard of it, and digital what? And then also simultaneously, we have a question for you. If you are familiar with the Digital Coast, oh, I lost my, what resource or resources have you used that are available on the Digital Coast? So I'm going to put that into the chat box. And so again, if you've used it before, if you could share what resource or resources you've used, that would be great. So I see the answers to the poll question are coming in. So it looks like the majority that have answered so far are saying, I've heard of it. And then after that, somewhat familiar. There are a few that are saying digital what, and one that's very familiar. So perhaps that person could share what resource or resources they've used from the Digital Coast. And we ask that question so that folks can see what others in the region, what other resources others are using and that they find useful. I'll give it a minute here. So thanks, Karina. So the Lake Level Viewer, that's a pretty popular one for those who know about the Digital Coast. CCAP data and dashboard, and then also our training resources. Oh, thank you. I figured it was you, Karina. So also the peer-to-peer case study is great. We'll talk about a few of those today. Data imagery training. Yep, we'll talk about those things today. Oh, I can end poll. Sorry, I'm so familiar with Zoom, you can tell. Okay, so I think folks can see the share result. Here are the results of the poll. It's the same as to what I was describing. Okay, great. Thanks for answering that. That helps us as we do this presentation today. So next slide, please, Brandon. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll. All right. So first, before we talk about the Digital Coast, a little bit about NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. So 4 major programs make up the office, which are listed on this slide, and each counts on active partnerships to be successful. So the first, the National Coastal Zone Management Program. It's a unique federal and state partnership that provides the most direct implementation of coastal management policy. There are 8 coastal zone management programs for each of the Great Lakes states, including Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Second, the National Estuarine Research Reserves. They lead the nation's estuary science efforts. The 29 protected areas also contribute local science-based training and education programs and provide unique recreational opportunities. There are currently 2 NERs in the Great Lakes, and there will be 3, so including Lake Superior NER. And I'll skip over the Coral Reef Conservation Program. And then the 4th program that makes up our office is the Digital Coast, which is the focus for today. So next slide, please. So the Digital Coast, it's more than just data, and it's more than just a website. It is a constituent-driven, integrated enabling platform that supports coastal resource management. So what does it mean to be an enabling platform? It means that we do more than just point users to resources. We augment them with context, guidance, and direction through training and technical assistance. This helps to ensure use and application of the resources. So this is a screenshot of the homepage. You can see towards the bottom there are 4 boxes that lead you to data, tools, training, and stories. So currently under data, we have over 2,900 data sets. Under tools, there are over 70 decision support and visualization tools. And these aren't just OCM generated tools, but also we will host partner resources as well. Under training, there are over 160 training resources, which includes instructor-led training, where the traditional training, as well as what we call on-demand resources that can be used at any time, including self-guided modules, quick references, case studies that were mentioned, publications, videos, and webinars. And then finally, stories from the field. We have over 110 stories of how Digital Coast resources have been used to achieve results. So in summary, there are a lot of resources and information available on the Digital Coast, and hopefully the presentation today will highlight the breadth of resources, but also help to make the Digital Coast more approachable. So Brandon, he shared the link to the Digital Coast in the chat box in case you'd like to follow, in case you'd like to have it open during the presentation, but you don't need to have it open. So next slide, please. The Digital Coast is also a partnership. Since 2006, this group of NGOs representing well over 100,000 members have been working with us at NOAA to shape the vision and content of the Digital Coast. These organizations offer a diversity of perspectives and requirements for information and resources to meet their members' needs. And their members include planners, floodplain managers, county officials, conservationists, real estate developers, and GIS specialists. Next slide, please. So let's get started. Imagine that you live and work in the town of lake-adjacent Minneconnegan. Your community has been experiencing increased coastal flooding and erosion over the past few years. You've also been experiencing more intense rainfall, which is contributing to difficulties managing stormwater. The community wants to address the current issues while being proactive about planning for future conditions, including taking into consideration climate change. So the community is also becoming more aware of nature-based solutions, and they think that that may be one strategy they may take to address some of the issues they're experiencing. So we'll walk through now how the Digital Coast can help support Minneconnegan to achieve its objectives. And note that we will share all the resources we will discuss today, along with links in a document after the meeting. So next slide. So as I said, there's a lot of information and resources on the Digital Coast. And so where should Minneconnegan start? I am showing here again the landing page. One great place to start is topics, the link to which is shown in the upper right-hand side. And we will click there. Next slide, please. So here is the topics page. There are 10 topic areas on this page, and I'm currently showing 6. You can think of them like recipes. Each page contains resources from across the site, including data, tools, and training that are relevant to that topic area. 2 topic areas that are relevant to Mini-Conaghan are adaptation strategies, and that's on the upper left-hand side, and natural infrastructure. I will note that we often use natural infrastructure, green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions interchangeably, and you'll notice that I'll do that even through this presentation. There are other areas that are relevant to Mini-Conaghan as well on this page, but note that no individual topic area is mutually exclusive of the others. So meaning that you may find the same resource under multiple topic areas if it's relevant to both. So you don't have to worry too much about where you start if multiple areas seems relevant. Next slide, please. So alternatively, if Mini-Conaghan was thinking already that they'd like to learn more about adaptation planning, they can start at the training page and see what is available. From there, they can use the search and our filtering features on the page, or look at the training calendar or course calendar. So they can also search across the entire site with the magnifying glass icon that's in the upper tippy top corner, right-hand corner. Next slide, please. So Mini-Conaghan comes across the online instructor-led training, Coastal Adaptation Planning Essentials, and it is the first ingredient in their personal recipe. They see on the landing page for the training that it is an interactive course designed for coastal management practitioners who are just starting to address the challenges resulting from climate change. The entire course is conducted online. It includes a combination of self-guided learning and interactive instructor-led sessions with group activities. Know that there's also an in-person version of this course called Adaptation Planning for Coastal Communities. That one has been around for a few years, but this all virtual version is pretty new. Next slide, please. All right, so in both the virtual and in-person training, participants learn the foundational concepts of a 5-step adaptation planning process. Participants learn how to first organize preliminary steps for planning. Second, consider information sources to better understand local changing conditions. 3, describe aspects of vulnerability and approaches to scoping a vulnerability assessment. 4, identify and select different types of adaptation options. And 5, discuss a pathway for taking action. So Mini-Conaghan decides that they would like to host this course for partners and stakeholders they think are relevant to the planning process in their community. So they can either, how do they do that? They can either email the email address provided on the training landing page to request the training. Alternatively, they can reach out to their local coastal management program or NEAR or Sea Grant to work with them to host. So those organizations frequently host our trainings, the OCM's trainings. And note that the Office for Coastal Management, OCM, does not charge a fee for our training. So we'll be using this 5-step process shown here on the slide for the rest of this presentation to introduce some of the other Digital Coast resources that can support Mini-Conaghan through their journey. And with that, I will turn it to Brandon. Brandon.
Thanks, Becky. And so we've kind of acknowledged the first step in this process and getting started. And so the next couple of slides here are going to address these number 2 and 3, which is looking at climate and impacts, as well as assessing vulnerability. And so to really get started, we sometimes need to go all the way back to foundational data sets. And one of the things that we're going to be doing today is using some of the tools on Digital Coast to find the data you're looking for. And in this case, we were looking at coastal inundation. And so one of the first things we may want to look at is our nearshore coastal elevation and bathymetry to assess, what the condition or the shoreline looks like currently through various data sets available on Digital Coast. And there are 2 tools that can really help to do this very well. The first I'll be highlighting today is the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory. Basically, finding out what data is available as in regards to elevation, whether that's bathymetry or topography. And the second tool is actually linked to that first tool, and that is our data access viewer. It gets people directly to the imagery, land cover, or elevation, and LiDAR data sets to support their needs. So we'll go ahead and first launch the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory. And the reason that I'm bringing this one into view today is we did recently release an update to this tool in terms of its overall use and some of the capabilities present within. So we'll go ahead and launch the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory from the Digital Coast. So up front, you are presented with, where do you want to begin your search? And so in this case, we'll go ahead and just select a community at large here in the Lake Superior Basin. And I'll pick Two Harbors, Minnesota. If I can spell Harbors correctly there. And so what's nice is you can go ahead and click on that location. Similarly, you could even look for, say, a county. So Cook County. And we could look at Illinois. We can look at Minnesota. And what this will do is actually already start to filter out data sets that may cover that particular geography. And so what you'll see is it already has identified 19 elevation data sets that cover this particular location. And it's actually organized by the time that they are entered in. So here you can see they're sorted by the collection year, with the more current at the top, going down to the older data sets at the bottom here. And so this allows you to then, hover over each of these particular data sets and see what pops up. In this case, 2 of these for Grand Marais Harbor, and it's showing up in the little location here on the map. If we go to some of the older data sets, you'll see the footprints for those as well. You can click on each of these and find additional information in terms of where to access the data, the metadata records for each of those. And then in terms of other metadata about that is the quality level as it relates to the 3D elevation program. If there's any web services available, those would be linked here. And then if it's not meeting the USGS 3DEP requirements, giving a brief explanation as to why that is. In this case, it's just a lower quality LiDAR standard than what is needed for the USGS 3DEP standard. We also provide information on vertical accuracies, horizontal accuracies, and additional information here that can be viewed. And so maybe one of our communities is interested just in topography or the topographic side of elevation. And so we've now incorporated this filtering ability that allows you to go in and actually select what type of LiDAR or elevation product you're interested in. So in this case, maybe we are only interested in topo or topography LiDAR. And so now the results are actually filtered to only show those results that meet this need. Or we could say all, and we need something that's more relevant. And so we could put in a year, say 2016 to the present, and now it's filtering just for those data sets that are 2016 or newer. And again, each of these attribute fields can be filtered accordingly, including status, if it's complete, in progress, planned or funded, or if there's no information currently available. Maybe we need a certain quality level. In this case, maybe our engineers only are interested in using QL 0 through 2, and so we can go ahead and filter to just show 0, 1, and 2 in that data set. And then similarly too, is it meeting the 3DEP requirements? Yes, no, or expected to meet. And then this is where it really is important, is that data publicly available. And so you can even filter here, yes or no, in that regard. And so this is one of the first steps that often I get asked, what data is available from my geography? And we've incorporated a lot of those needs into the tool with its revisions as of late. Additionally, one of the things I like to point people out in seeing is that all the various data sets that exist within the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory, if you need to do a much larger geography, or maybe it's several counties, there is the opportunity here to now actually download the data sets in both an Esri file geodatabase format, as well as the OGC Open Geospatial Community GeoPackage format as well, depending on which software packages you are using to review this. And you can download these. We try to update these on a quarterly basis to reflect the latest and greatest in terms of new LiDAR data and elevation data products available to the user community. The second tool that I'll highlight is the Data Access Viewer. And the previous tool that I just showed, the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory, several of those data links point to resources on the Data Access Viewer. And today I'm just going to highlight elevation and LiDAR, but all of our NOAA's CCAP or Coastal Change Analysis Program land cover data sets can also be accessed through the Data Access Viewer, as well as imagery to include NGS, National Geodetic Survey, the National Agricultural Image Program, and other image collects that have been completed by our coastal partners. And so for today, we'll click on Elevation LiDAR, since we're interested in understanding coastal inundation along our shorelines. And the tool here is pretty straightforward. You can zoom in again to any geography. So in this case, I'm interested, for example, around Ashland. I can draw a box here, or again, we can also do a search here by community or lat long. And we can draw a box. Maybe we're interested in this part of the Ashland shoreline. And what you'll notice then is actually two different data sets do pop up. We have the 2015 female LiDAR point cloud. And this symbology here shows what type of data it is. In this case, it's a LiDAR point cloud. And we also have the 2009 Bayfield County LiDAR as well. If we click on these, you'll then also get that same attribute information that you saw in the US Interagency Elevation Inventory. And a few new key features that we've added into the Data Access Viewer is the ability to look at image services created from that particular, that like for some reason it's not working, but we'll come back. But we also can now also look at the point cloud itself with a couple new services. So we actually have a Poetry Viewer, and this will load up that LiDAR point cloud so you can take a look at it even before you start to download and work with it. And so this allows you to make sure the data covers what you need. There's a lot of different tools incorporated with this, including the ability to look at the elevation, the classification of the point cloud itself. And this just helps to make sure that before you start downloading several gigabytes worth of LiDAR data, that it is going to meet your needs in that regard. And of course, the other thing that is nice about this as well is if your geography is small enough, we've actually incorporated on the back end of the Data Access Viewer the ability to take this, for example, this data set in this geography and add it to our shopping cart. By adding this data to the shopping cart, it actually allows you to go ahead and select the item in your cart and create a wide variety of different products from that. So not only can we look at the LiDAR point cloud, but if you're not comfortable working with LiDAR data, we do actually allow you to create rasters, contours, and other products from that elevation LiDAR point cloud data product. It also allows you to reproject it. So in this case, we could say UTM, we want it in zone 15, and then adjust the horizontal and vertical datums accordingly, the units that we want it to be in. In this case, maybe we're interested in digital elevation model. So we're going to save it as raster, and we want to have the average elevation values. And we can actually specify what grid cell size we want. Do we need a 1 meter product, or maybe it's a 3 meter product? And in this case, we can save it as a GeoTIFF, an ERDOS Imagine file, ASCII file, or floating point. In this case, if we say GeoTIFF and leave everything else, we can then go ahead and say, we just want to look at the ground and hit next, put in your email address, and you'll receive an email once the backend data processing is complete that has generated that digital elevation model you need for your area of interest. So this is just a couple of tools that are readily available through the Digital Coast that help to get you to that data. That same elevation data is what we use in the lake level viewer as well. And this tool allows us to all visualize that plus and minus 6 foot change in water levels. And I've presented on this in the past, I know, to the CHAOSS group and others. And we're currently in the process of working to update this with newer elevation data that's been collected over the last several years. But one of the things that I did want to highlight today is the same data that's used in the lake level viewer is available for download. And so the digital elevation models, which are seamless topography products at a 3 meter spatial resolution, can be used for other purposes. This includes the opportunity to identify the minimum and maximum water level change for a given lake. In this case, we see a section of Lake Superior shoreline here where we've highlighted in red those areas that fall between minimum and maximum water level changes. Or maybe we're interested in understanding coastal inundation due to wave runoff. And so we can look at the nearshore bathymetry slope to see which parts of the shoreline may be susceptible to larger wave and higher wave energies along our shoreline that could impact some of the inundation experience along the coast as well. Another product that we recently released is the 2019 Great Lakes Hardened Shorelines data set. And this is for the entirety of the US shorelines on the and includes all the Great Lakes and connecting channels. And this data set is also available through the Digital Coast under the data tab. And if you just search for shoreline using that magnifying lens that Becky highlighted earlier, you will also find this data set through that means as well. And so we can look at the data here for Lake Superior. And what I've highlighted is actually the hardened or artificial shorelines in Lake Superior, denoted by this red-orange color along the shorelines. And the blue line is actually the CZM boundaries for all 3 states that border on Lake Superior here. We can use this data to even go further in and look at the breakdown of our shorelines to include the percentage that's artificial. In this case, for Lake Superior, that's just over 7%. But we can also look at, the fine sediment beaches, the coarse sediment beaches, and bedrock, which makes up almost 50% of Lake Superior, which isn't surprising for a lot of us. But this is the benefit of this data set, is it not only goes in and shows the breakup of natural versus artificial or hardened shorelines, but we can also look at the condition of those artificial or hardened shoreline structures as well. And so the majority of the hardened shorelines in in Lake Superior are artificial of moderate quality, where we only have about 4% of poor quality, which means these might be the areas where a coastal engineer or community may want to assess those structures and whether replace those or maybe use alternately living shorelines practices. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Becky.
All right, thanks, Brandon. So the town of Minneconnegan has now documented past and expected changes and associated impacts with those, and assessed the vulnerability of their shoreline and of the community more broadly. They have heard about nature-based solutions, but want to learn more about it to determine if the approach is appropriate for their community to reduce vulnerability and to build resilience. So the next 2 steps of the 5-step process are number 4, strategies and actions, and number 5, selecting and implementing. I will discuss resources that can help support these steps. And you can find all the resources that I will cover next in the training section of the Digital Coast. So next slide, please. Okay, so first, to learn more about nature-based solutions for coastal hazards, Minneconnegan may consider this training course, which prepares coastal managers, planners, and others to plan for and implement natural or nature-based infrastructure projects to reduce natural hazards in their community. So the course consists of 2 connected parts. Part 1 is a self-guided module, online module that covers foundational concepts of nature-based solutions. Note that this module was very recently made available on the Digital Coast to take anytime, not just in association with this instructor-led course. And there's also a Spanish version available of that self-guided module. And then part 2 of this course can be virtual or in person. For the virtual version, participants interact with their peers and experts to learn more about implementing nature-based solutions, including challenges and potential solutions. Next slide. However, similar to how you can substitute ingredients in a recipe, perhaps Minneconnegan is fairly well aware of nature-based solution and only needs a refresher and some guidance. In that case, they may want to substitute the instructor-led training with a new quick reference bundle shown on the left that covers practices and benefits, installation and maintenance cost, and tips for the non-economists for assessing the cost and benefits of nature-based solutions. We also have the more in-depth guide to assessing green infrastructure cost and benefits specific to flood reduction that's shown on the right. This guide is an oldie but a goodie, published in 2015. It lays out a 6-step watershed-based approach for documenting the cost of flooding, projected increased flooding and associated costs under future land use and climate conditions, and calculating the long-term benefits and cost of green infrastructure. The guide draws from 4 case studies, including 2 in the Great Lakes in Duluth and Toledo. Next slide, please. All right. Based on weighing the benefits and cost of different approaches, including installation and maintenance cost, Minneconnigan has narrowed down to pursuing two practices: living shorelines along the coast and open space preservation to help manage stormwater. They want to explore options for funding and financing the work. Our office is currently hosting a webinar series on funding and financing coastal resilience, and that's shown on the left. Two of those webinars have already taken place, one on the basics and one on environmental impact bonds. The recording of both of those webinars will be available on the Digital Coast, and in fact, it already is for the basics, and will soon be for environmental impact bonds. There are other webinars in the works, including one focused on small and disadvantaged communities, and that one will likely happen in the fall. We also have a quick reference on funding and financing options. That's shown on the right. It provides an overview and examples of different options. For instance, on the funding side, it includes tax proceeds, fees, grants, and crowdfunding. A couple of Great Lakes examples are included in the document, including tax increment financing in Chicago and a wetland mitigation in lieu fee program in Wisconsin. Having said that, although examples from outside the Great Lakes can also be useful. And then on the financing side, because we can't forget about financing, it includes loans, state revolving funds, multiple types of bonds, including environmental impact bonds, and parametric or index insurance are included. And one example from the Great Lakes on the financing side is the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District's climate bond. And it's not included in here, but Buffalo just recently released an environmental impact bond. Next slide, please. All right, one other item I'd like to discuss that can help with these 5 steps, or with the steps of the 5-step planning process, are case studies, which were mentioned before. And these highlight how other coastal practitioners have tackled thorny issues. So all the case studies include lessons learned. The case studies are typically more detailed than the stories from the field that I mentioned earlier, and they are not limited to the use of Digital Coast resources. And here on the slide are a few examples of the case studies we have that are relevant to Minneconnigan. So the first, building momentum for green infrastructure, is from Toledo. It talks about steps taken to build and maintain momentum for implementing green infrastructure in the city. One of the lessons learned from that case study was to start small, then go big. And this case study is actually related to the guide that I mentioned a couple slides ago. The other two are from regions outside, other regions of the country, but are still useful. For the second, as gray infrastructure ages or fails in the Great Lakes, there may be an opportunity for replacing it with green or greener infrastructure. And this case study talks about just that in a high energy riverine site in North Carolina, so freshwater. One of the lessons learned was to consider all sources of erosion, including nearby roads and parking lots that might be contributing to stormwater runoff and shoreline erosion from the landward side. And then finally, investing in flood mitigation pays off immensely, discusses how one small community in South Carolina is investing in different land use approaches, such as open space preservation, to reduce flooding, resulting in savings for flood insurance policy holders in that community. One of the lessons learned was to use terms that resonate with people as you work on these issues. So next slide, please. All right, so I talked about instructor-led training, quick references, a publication, webinar series, and case studies that can be helpful to Minneconnigan, all available in the training section of the Digital Coast. We also have a training calendar for our instructor-led training, which can be accessed via the training page. I'm showing it here. It includes training being hosted locally, in addition to training that our office is hosting that is then available nationally for anyone that's interested. So if you would open it now, you can see that there is registration open for 2 OCM hosted courses. So social science basics, including using social science for stakeholder engagement and writing effective survey questions, and as well as the course 7 best practices for risk communication. They're all upcoming and registration is open. You will soon see an OCM hosted offering of Coastal Adaptation Planning Essentials, the training that helped to guide us through Minneconnigan's story. The training is split over 2 half days and will be on August 31st and September 2nd. So mark your calendars if you're interested. It will be on the calendar soon to register, and feel free to get in touch with me if you have questions about that. And the calendar also includes training being hosted by state or local entities like your coastal management programs or NEARS or Sea Grants. Sometimes there are a few spots available in those, and So contact information is provided to inquire. All of our courses are currently being offered virtually. We haven't started to schedule in-person training yet. Next slide, please. So one other navigation tip for the site, most of the resources on the Digital Coast have these boxes shown here towards the bottom of their landing pages that show related stories, tools, and training to that resource. This can help you to connect the dots between different relevant resources in addition to the topics pages. Next slide. Okay, so thank you for joining us on Mini-Connigan's journey through the data, tools, and training resources available that can help them address their coastal management needs and build resilience. We just showcased a few of the resources that are available, but hopefully this was helpful. And we now have a couple questions for you. Next slide, please. So the first is, what would you like to see on the Digital Coast? So this could be, and just go ahead and answer in the chat. So this could be data, decision support tools, or training resources, or perhaps you have a story on how you've used a Digital Coast resource, which could be written into a story from the field, or perhaps you would like to offer a case study about how your community tackled a thorny coastal management issue. We are all ears. We are constantly working to ensure resources on the Digital Coast are relevant and timely to the coastal management community. So we are interested in your thoughts. So if there's any resources that you would like to see on the Digital Coast, and if you'd like to think about it, that's fine too. You can email Brandon and I at any time with any ideas that you may have. I'll give it another minute to see if folks want to share some ideas in the chat. I'm sorry if you hear my daughter screaming in the background. Okay.
Sure. So see one come in from Karina here. So for folks like me who haven't worked with GIS in a long time, I love the ability to clip and analyze data sets like the hard and shoreline data within the web application. And so it sounds like we need to add that hard and shorelines and do the kind of a clip and ship type of approach for the delivery on that. I will say one of the things I didn't point out is the hard and shorelines data set. It is available for download, but we also do make that available as a web feature service. So if you want to bring that in to a project without having to download the data, that is another option too. And we're trying to do that more with future data sets as we incorporate them, is make them more web accessible. But then certainly to the point here about adding in the analysis piece, definitely we'll take that into consideration, Karina, moving forward, how we can get those products, especially larger regional scale data sets down to a much more manageable size.
And I see another suggestion from Melanie about consider adding a Great Lakes regional section under the topics. And we hear about this, I was just on a call yesterday where the Pacific Islands too brought up that not everything is relevant to them. So we do hear this, and it's a little bit tricky because, for instance, in the training section, I would say at least 90% of resources in the training section are nationally relevant, so relevant to the Great Lakes. So just picking and choosing. But that said, at minimum, I think there definitely can be improvements on the site in terms of the search functionality. So sometimes, for instance, in the tools section, if you would search for Great Lakes, only 6 tools show up currently, I think, if it's still the way it was when I last searched, but there are more than 6 tools that are relevant to the Great Lakes. So there definitely are improvements that can be made in that respect. And we'll have to, we'll definitely relay the idea to make a regional topics page. We'll see what happens. So, Melanie, yes, go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, should we go to the second question?
Yeah, the second question is you're already leaning into that one. So the second question is, what would you like, no, I haven't advanced my own slide, but Brandon has. What would make using the Digital Coast easier? So again, feel free to put ideas into the chat. I'm trying to put the question into the chat, there we go. But if if you think of anything after this presentation, of course, like I said, feel free to reach out to Brandon and I separately. Like one thing is that self-guided module on the basics of nature-based solutions for coastal hazards, as I mentioned, is available in Spanish, but we don't have a ton of resources available in Spanish and other languages. So that's one thing that we have started to do more so. So that's just one example of something that can be done. Yeah, that's great, Melanie. And if there's, okay, Brandon, do you want to react to that?
I was definitely going to say that is one of the things that we're trying to work on, is getting more of those self-guided training resources available, especially with the data and tools. I'm actually the hard shorelines one. A lot of people ask, well, hey, wait, how did you get those numbers from that? One of the things I would also point people to, kind of getting to that self-guided training and about our data sets and tools that we often overlook, and that is actually, let me go ahead and just share my screen here again quickly. On the Digital Coast webpage, there's a kind of a hidden gem here that I'd like to point people to under the quick links, and that is actually the GeoZone blog here. And it we actually kind of have some of our geospatial secrets and how we make the sauce, getting back to the cooking analogy here, working with the various data sets, whether that be the LiDAR data sets, the land cover data sets, or even some of the tools that we have available. For example, I just talked about the U.S. Interagency Elevation Inventory version 2, and there's a nice blog here that's been written together by one of our esteemed colleagues down here at the bottom, and it's big. This is one of Kirk Waters' blogs, and so we try to incorporate more of those resources that you were just talking about, Melanie, in regards to self-guidance with data and tools, typically through our GeoZone blog as well. So I highly encourage folks to check that out as well.
And if there's any particular data sets or tools where you would like to see some self-guided training, as Brandon mentioned, hardened shorelines maybe one, but if there's any other ones, that's definitely something that's always we're taking input on, because that's definitely something we'll do as we can. So whether it be through the GeoZone blog or through some other means like a self-guided module or videos or what have you. Okay, and yeah, I'll hand it over to Brandon now to wrap up, but continue to add into the chat if you think of things.
Certainly. So one of the things we want to do is, of course, acknowledge that it's more than just the Digital Coast. We really do depend heavily on our state and reserve partners as well. And we also do not want to forget either our Sea Grant partners. All these groups are very instrumental in making sure that we are successful in getting the data, information, tools, and training out to our partners, whether it's a small coastal community or a large metropolitan community as well. So we're really dependent on the 8 Great Lakes state coastal zone management programs. And as mentioned, we have 2 established reserves with the 3rd coming online in Green Bay. We're looking really forward to that as well. And then again, the network of the sea grants across the Great Lakes region is another valuable resource as well. And so we all work very interconnected in trying to address a lot of these coastal issues that people bring to the table. And so with that, I think we're at time for maybe a few questions.
Yes, please put your questions in the chat. First of all, thank you so much, Brandon and Becky, for sharing what Digital Coast is and how we can use it. And I want to share that Becky is putting in the chat, they've created their own evaluation form. So just to give them a little bit of feedback about how this presentation went and whether you're going to use the Digital Coast in the future. And we will also share their slides and other resources. And I do want to point out, they're mentioning some of those local contacts. We've created a list, at least for some of the resources here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we're going to share that with you after the meeting as well. So I see a first question coming in from Aaron. Were those pie charts that Brandon showed created within the web tool or something you made after downloading the data itself?
Great question, Aaron. So those are actually created from the data itself. It's not currently in any type of web tool or anything to that effect. In fact, I'm currently in the process of drafting a GeoZone blog to show people how to do this on their own. So downloading the Hard and Shorelines data set, and then using a lot of the sum ifs and count if type of functions. And personally, I would like to actually make this available as a Python Jupyter notebook so that people can actually download they don't have to even, do all the cranking. They just be able to click and choose the data sets for example, a state that they're interested in or a section of the shoreline. So that is something that, as Becky mentioned, we're actively trying to develop when we have time. And so that is something I'm hoping to put up on the GeoZone blog for people to do that further analysis with the Hard and Shorelines data set.
All right, I'm seeing a comment coming in that this is very cool. Thanks, Lydia. Brandon, I've got a quick question. So you're talking about new developments and efforts coming underway. How can someone stay informed about, new tools and resources that are coming on?
That's a great question, and I think that was one of the links we were going to make sure that people are aware of. So if you go to the Digital Coast, we actually do have a newsletter that keeps people aware of what's up and coming on the Digital Coast through our Digital Coast connections. And so you can view the past issues here. So here's the July 2021 and June and so forth. But what I encourage people is there's actually a subscribe button here as well. And so if you subscribe, you just provide your contact information, you'll be added to our Digital Coast Connections newsletter, and that information will get sent to your inbox monthly with what is available. And so thanks again for pointing that out.
And I see Madison just posted that link right there, so you guys can sign up for that newsletter. I have a question coming in from Joshua on some of the social vulnerability data sets. Is there a specific reason you folks went with SOV instead of the SVI used by the CDC? So you give a little bit of justification if you're familiar with that about why some data sets were used instead of others.
Yeah, so at the time on the lake level, and I assume, Joshua, that you're in reference to the Social Vulnerability Index that's used on the lake level viewer, and that's also a data set that we connect to on, okay, good, that we connect to on Digital Coast. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we had an established relationship with the university to leverage that Social Vulnerability Index. Moving forward, this is actually one of the data sets we're not sure if we're going to incorporate into the future because it is a little dated at the moment. There's also some licensing behind that as well. And so that is where we're, as Becky asked, making adjustments to the tools to meet the needs of our partners. For example, we're looking to redo the lake level viewer and make it a little bit updated with newer technologies and things to that effect, not only new data, but new technologies behind it. So certainly, if that is still something of interest and having the Social Vulnerability Index, that's something that we work with because that data set's not only used in the lake level viewer, it is also used in the sea level rise viewer, but there's that licensing behind it as well. And we try to use and leverage open data sets, so data sets that anybody, whether it be a NOAA personnel or a coastal program, or even an individual researcher can gain access to. And so that is one of the things currently that has limited us. And I'll have to check why we aren't looking at the SVI that is used by the CDC with our developers and geospatial team in Charleston.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great overview, and I would just encourage anyone who has data questions around the Great Lakes. Brandon is an excellent resource that we have locally. So first of all, thank you so much, Becky and Brandon. And I see some claps coming through. You have that option to do some reactions depending on your version of the Zoom. And it's now time to move on to our next speaker. So Eric Peterson, so glad to have him join us. Eric Peterson is the Iron County Forest Administrator. The Iron County Forest, which is over in Wisconsin, for those of you who might be joining from other states, is the fourth largest in the state of Wisconsin with over 175,000 acres. They have 4 developed campgrounds, including the one at Saxon Harbor. He's going to tell us a little bit more about where that is. And it's the only county-owned and operated marina on the Great Lakes in Wisconsin. And it has a 94 slip Saxon Harbor. He has a BS in forestry from Michigan Technical University with a minor in business management. He spent 17 years in private forest industry and land management before jumping into the public sector working at the Wisconsin DNR. In January of 2015, he began the job as the Iron County Forest Administrator and truly drove into public recreation management. With the disaster of 2016, became the project manager for the Saxon Harbor Reconstruction Project and has taken the lead on funding options. So Eric, I see you're being able to share your screen, and can we hear you?
Hopefully you're able to.
All right, that sounds good. All right,
okay.
So I'm going to hand things over to Eric.
All right, thanks, Melanie. I am Eric Peterson, Iron County Forest Administrator. I've been involved in this Saxon Harbor project for the last over 5 years now, getting it put back together, and it has been quite the learning experience, to say the least. A little quick picture of the Saxon Harbor facility here in Iron County prior to the storm in 2016. We had a 91 slip marina at the time and a 33 site campground adjacent with County Highway A splitting the marina and the campground. On July 11th and 12th of 2016, we had the major flood event that went across northern Wisconsin, and I think there was 11 counties that were declared as part of the disaster. But a flood coming down Oronto Creek completely wiped out our marina and campground facility, as you can see here in the pictures. We lost quite a few boats. We had 75 boats in the marina at the time of the flood. Many were stayed in the harbor, but more than half of them were washed completely out in the Lake Superior during the event. Some pictures of the shoreline. This is late morning on July 12th. This is looking west along the Lake Superior shoreline. Some pictures from within the marina. We have a sailboat that was sunk right here in the marina. The center parking area down here in the lower right is completely washed away and gone. Ultimate devastation, and not something that we truly expected to have to deal with ever. This is a picture of a culvert that was under County Highway A, approximately a half a mile upstream of Lake Superior in Parker Creek. The culvert was originally a 10-foot diameter by 92-foot long culvert, and as you can see, it got carried downstream about a quarter mile. And that gentleman walking there on the left-hand side of the screen is actually standing in Parker Creek. So you can see that when there's not floodwaters, it's not much of a stream. So Saxon Harbor is located up here in Lake Superior and Oronto Bay, and the Oronto Creek watershed and Parker Creek watersheds equal out to just under 17 square miles. It's essentially from US 2 in a triangle shape down to the lake. Elevation drop in that distance over 5 miles. The elevation drop is about 400 feet. So they're very flashy, deep ravine streams. And unfortunately, all 17 square miles of this watersheds exit at Saxon Harbor along our marina. So this picture is from in August of 2016. We've started the cleanup efforts, which began immediately. Saxon Harbor Boating Club, the county, DNR, Coast Guard. There was many, many different agencies there that were there to help recover boats and just start cleaning up the general debris from the storm. Wisconsin Army National Guard came in late August and early September to help remove trees and stumps and just general debris from the area and hauled it to a nearby gravel pit that we had to dispose of it and just get it off of the site. The initial FEMA debris removal project was PW 086, and that one was completed in November and December of 2016. There was a value to that of just over $166,000. And all that basically did was take the layer of silt out of the old campground and remove the damaged structures that were left around the marina, along with a few docks and trees and things like that that were in the water that were unable to be removed by the National Guard folks. So right away, we began the reconstruction process, design process. We hired our engineering team, both infrastructure and environment, in April of 2017. We decided to reduce the number of slips in our marina to 81 seasonal slips and 13 transient slips, giving us a total of 94. Prior to the flood, we had 101 transient and seasonal slips combined. And the primary reason for lowering or reducing the number of slips we had was because the trend is towards larger boats, and larger boats take wider slips. And we're trying to better accommodate our user base as we went through the rebuilding project. We decided to relocate one of our boat launches. We do have 3 launch lanes in the Saxon Harbor Marina. The original one on the north side was located here on the end of the north parking lot, and it was susceptible to wave action off of Lake Superior. So we relocated that to the west end of the North Basin. It's very protected. It hardly gets any wave action at all now. And the boaters and the users really appreciate the fact that it's so much easier to load and unload their boat. We added new parking areas over here on the west side of the marina, and day use areas were added out along the north shore. And one of the major things we added in this project is we added a concrete spillway over here along Oronto Creek. And that spillway was added to help funnel 2/3 of any floodwaters through the marina and straight out to Lake Superior, and allow the final third of the floodwaters to continue down the original path of the creek. Because one of the issues with the 2016 flood was the 11+ inches of rain we got in 4 hours, which was classified anywhere from 1,000 to a 1,500-year flood event. None of these man-made structures are going to be able to withstand that kind of flood, but 100-year flood levels typically used to go over the roadway as well at times. So the redesign process added the spillway to take those higher flood waters into account, which unfortunately we see more and more as we're moving forward here. The other thing that began right away was the redesign of the County Highway A process. So in the spring of 2018, we began our Oronto and Parker Creek reconstruction project. That project was to redredge the creeks to their proper depths, get them opened back up, because after the flood, the creeks were flowing through the marina. We had to get the streams back in their original channel. The other part of the project was to reinforce those stream banks and the levees around the marina with heavy riprap. And we also had to rebuild an area near the east parking lot of the marina that was washed completely away by Parker Creek as it merged with Oronto Creek. This was a FEMA-funded project. The original project cost for just the dredging and reconstruction of Oronto and Parker Creek and fixing that parking lot was $218,600. FEMA-funded project. So we've got some slides here as we move through the next few of that actual construction project. This area that the machinery is operating in was all at one time mowed yard, and it was washed completely out. We're looking upstream of Parker Creek straight ahead of us. Oronto Creek would come in from your right-hand side near the bulldozer. And the excavator is actually sitting in the main channel of Oronto and Parker Creek just before the outfall of Lake Superior. So you can see there's a lot of sediment that was put in there, a lot of debris. And the contractor began that work in February to take advantage of frozen ground conditions, working so close to the stream edge. The other important thing to remember is Oronto Creek at this time during construction is flowing out through the marina. So we didn't have to contend with Oronto Creek stream flow, just Parker Creek. And as you saw in the picture of the crushed culvert, there's not a lot of stream flow there during a non-flood time period. a picture of some of the completed work. This is looking downstream at Oronto towards the confluence with Parker Creek. Again, all of this sediment that you're looking at here is material that was placed there by that flood in July of 2016. Machinery is working to get that cleaned out, redefining the stream banks. And the machinery on the left-hand side is sitting on part of the levee that holds the stream in place. And I lost something there. Melanie, I may have to have you grab slides here for me.
Happy to do that. I will go ahead and try to find where you were.
Yeah. It looks like my internet connection was the issue there, so.
Okay, I'm going to bring it up.
All right. We got to go back a couple from here. There we go. Okay, so we can go advance the next slide. Okay, so thank you. This will work. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the riprap that is stockpiled to be placed along the stream bank to armor the stream banks. On the left-hand side of the screen, our Parker and Oronto Creek channel has been re-dredged out, and the rock is getting ready to be placed along those stream banks. Next slide. So here's some of the finished product. This is a little bit farther upstream of Oronto Creek. You can see the bank there on the left-hand side. It's got all the rock armoring on it. The new floodplain is on the right-hand side for the added overflow protection for the 100-year flood stage. And farther down in the stream, farther downstream there would be where our concrete overflow would be. So much more fortified than it was before. Prior to this, it was just a sand and earthen levee. This area that we're looking at right here was completely washed away during the flood. Next slide. So here is looking off that little footbridge we've seen in a couple different places there. This is the confluence of Oronto and Parker Creek. We're looking down Oronto Creek. Parker Creek comes in from your right, and the outflow to Lake Superior to your left. We have all of that riprap that we saw in the previous slides. That is covered with topsoil, and then this protective netting on top of that. That was a requirement of the DNR permit, which we had some rather terse discussions about on whether or not it would stay there and be worth it. But in the end, it was part of the permit. It was put in place. This is probably late May or so. Towards the bottom of the screen, you can see a big rock sticking out there. There was fish structures that were placed in Oronto Creek as part of the restoration project as well. But this is what the finished product would look like prior to grass seed coming up. Okay, next slide. So the work in 2018, the Oronto Creek project was the winter, but rolling around into the summer, everything really got rolling. Saxon Harbor is also a harbor of refuge on Lake Superior with the Army Corps. So the areas that needed to be redredged moving out from Lake Superior and into our North Basin are actually the responsibility of the Army Corps because of the harbor of refuge. Anything outside of the main channel and the main channel of the North Basin of the marina is considered Iron County's ownership and responsibility. The other project that happened right away, starting in the beginning of 18, was the reconstruction of County Road A. County Road A, as you see there, used to run straight north to the lake. The new bridge is being built there on the left-hand side in this photo. The original bridge structure that crossed Oronto Creek was a 40-foot span with about a 9-foot clearance underneath it. The new structure that was rebuilt is 104 feet long and it has about a 13-foot clearance. It's a 3-span bridge. It was also placed upstream of the original one so that the bridge restriction is not in the middle of a river bend as it's seen before. So the dredging contractor came into the marina, and between Iron County's dredging project and the Army Corps project, the contractor removed over 51,000 cubic yards of material. The marina has a depth of 10 feet pretty much throughout the entire thing, with riprap side slopes, and it was filled up. As you can see in the photo, that south basin there, all of that material that's through the center of the basin, that was put in there by the flood, and it should be 10 feet deep. So it was completely, the south basin was completely filled. So it took 51,000 yards, and it took the dredge contractor about 3.5 months to get that all dredged out and trucked away. The County A project was funded by Federal Highway Administration and Wisconsin DOT. That was their project, and that was a $1.85 million project, funded at 80% by Federal Highway Administration, with Iron County chipping in the final 20% on that. The Army Corps dredge project was $1.375 million. That included the main channel coming in and the center of the North Basin. And then the Iron County FEMA dredge project, which included the reestablishment of the concrete walls around the basin. That was a $3.17 million project. All of that work began in early summer of 2018. Next slide. So the dredge contractor arrived May of 2018. As you can see, it's a pretty sizable barge. Their dredge barge itself was a 50-some foot barge, and then they had a 100-foot barge here in the foreground that was for putting their dredge spoilings on and moving themselves around the marina. Next slide. And because we love disasters so much, we got a storm in the middle of reconstruction. So we had a Father's Day storm in 2018, caused a bunch of havoc all over northern Wisconsin and Minnesota as well. So I had our second declared federal disaster. We had heavy rains over Friday, Saturday, Sunday of Father's Day weekend, which brought an additional 5,000 cubic yards of sediment to the marina, filled in areas that had already been dredged. We had damages to roads and sidewalks that had been partially repaired. Some things that weren't damaged in 2016 were now damaged. All of the beautiful pictures you saw of Oronto and Parker Creek here just a little while ago, those were all refilled. And as I said, we had a second FEMA disaster declaration, which included 6 individual FEMA projects with a total cost of $337,000. And we are looking at in this picture where the concrete spillway was reconstructed. So next slide, please. So this is the edge of the travel lift where the concrete spillway is. You can see behind the trees there, that is Oronto Creek filled to its banks. Barely in the upper left-hand side, you can see that footbridge that we've seen in other photos. And these are full-size trees laying there with root balls on them and leaves and branches. And so there was enough water flow to float these full-size trees down the creek. Next slide. The picture of the marina, you can see the pile of sand there in the middle. That was an area that was completely dredged out already to depth of 10 feet. We've got a little more than 9 to 10 feet of sediment that got deposited right there. Plus all that woody debris is stuff that came down the creeks. You can see a tree out there floating. This is all within the work zone here of the dredge operator. The culvert that's floating there in the picture was one that had been stockpiled for use in the project on the road project and ended up floating out in the marina. We were able to salvage that one. but just this is the day after the Father's Day storm. Next one. Next slide, please, Melanie. Sorry. So this is Parker Creek with the jump back one there if we can. Yeah, so this is Parker Creek, the afternoon after the Father's Day storm, so that Monday. As you can see, the flood, there's a lot more flood water there. You see the pile of rock and sediment. All of this area was approximately 4.5 feet deep prior to the storm, and all this lovely rock and sediment come washing down the creek again. You can see the netting on the banks there and some of the riprap that was placed. All of that topsoil that was under that netting got washed out into Lake Superior, as I guess wasn't necessarily a surprise to everyone. All right, next slide. So this is the photo of the North Basin. You can see the dredge there. I included this picture to show for the dredging operation, they were offloading in our north parking lot. Everything was all silt fenced off, and it was a natural location for easy access and loading with an end loader so the dump trucks could haul the materials out. And you can see the center spit there on the right-hand side was slowly being rebuilt with rock and other added materials. And on the left-hand side of the basin there is the concrete wall that's starting to form the edge of the basin. Next slide. This is just a picture that one of our engineering site supervisors took the morning they were putting the bin wall in for the new boat landing. Sun coming up over the background there, and 28th August, we're at full depth in the North Basin, and they're starting to install the new boat launch. Next picture. So here's that same bin wall there in the background, and they've got everything all sheet piled off, and they're pouring the concrete for that. This is probably a week to 10 days after that previous picture. So things are moving right along. That bin wall is cast, or is sheet metal filled with clean stone and secured to the bottom of the basin. Next picture. So here's pretty much where we left off into fall of 2018. We've got a completed Oronto and Parker Creek flow. We've got a new County Highway A and bridge that's open for business. The basin walls are framed, and marina is dredged. And as you can see, for late September, the lake is starting to get ugly again. And this is pretty much where we left off for at the end of 2018. Next slide. And because Lake Superior is as predictable as ever, and all of that nice sediment was placed out into the lake, we had the drift of the sediment westward along Lake Superior. And this is the outflow of Oronto and Parker Creek on the 25th of September. Lake Superior has completely filled that in. There's about a 6-foot wall of sediment there that the creek is trying to work its way through. So we went out and had to open it up to allow the creek to free flow into Lake Superior the way it's supposed to, because at this point right here, it was backing up into the marina again due to this rock sediment deposits out along the lake. Next slide. So in all of this work on the marina, we also had the campground project. We were not allowed to build the campground back where it was because of Wisconsin administrative code saying that if we build it in a floodplain area, we have to be able to provide 24 hours notice of an impending flood. And as we learned from the original 2016 flood, we don't have hours, we have literal minutes once it starts raining. So we were not allowed to put it back in its original location. So we chose a spot that was just east, about a quarter mile of the marina, up on the high bluffs. Would have had a really fantastic view of Lake Superior from the campground. Well, once we started doing evaluations on it, we found an active eagle's nest on site, and there would have been significant wetland impacts to that. We chose an alternative 3, which is what you're looking at here in this picture. It had a 2-lobe option. We had a smaller campground out next to County A, and then another loop a little farther in next to Parker Creek. But that one was also determined that it just had too many wetland impacts there along these steep banks in Oronto Creek and Parker to be cost effective. Through the FEMA process, we were required to do an environmental assessment. Alternative 3, this one we're looking at, was one that was included in that assessment. Next slide. So we ended up with a new campground along County Highway A, 2 levels, a tiered level, 26 campsites. So we ended up losing 7 campsites from our original pre-flood. The reason we weren't able to expand this is we're pinned in by large bluffs, small streams at the bottom of those bluffs, County A property, combination of things. So 26 RV sites and a bathroom facility is what we could fit, and that's what we reconstructed. Next slide, please. So the Saxon Harbor Upland Marina project, it was awarded in late 2018 to Wayne Nacy Construction from here in Hurley. Once that contract was awarded, things got really busy construction-wise. During the overwinter of 2019, the new bathroom and shower building was being constructed. Our new office building down there was being constructed. That was done through the winter months. In April, we awarded the campground project, reconstruction project. And in May of 2019, full construction was underway on the Upland Marina project. Our campground was delayed due to permitting. We had some issues that we had to satisfy with Army Corps of Engineers through permitting, and then we had to wait for final approval of the environmental assessment with FEMA. So in late July, our Snow Country Contracting was able to begin the campground project. By August of 2019, Nacy Construction had reached substantial completion, and for Labor Day weekend of 2019, just over 3 years later, we had a soft opening of the new Saxon Harbor Marina, which we ended up being almost full that weekend with transient folks coming in and trying out the new facility. By October of 2019, Snow Country Contracting had completed removal of 64,000 cubic yards of material from the new campground site in preparation for final construction. Next slide. This is a picture of the concrete spillway that was constructed along Oronto Creek. So Oronto Creek is on your very right-hand side of the screen there behind the concrete. So we have the high wall right there about where the cursor was in the concrete. So the water will spill over. It's all concrete across here, spills in. 2/3 of the water would go into the marina. That high wall divides that 2/3 and 1/3, and 1/3 would continue on down Oronto Creek. This spillway was $160,000 addition. Prior to that, there was only a little bit of concrete along the marina there, and the rest of it was gravel, earth, and riprap. And as we could see in some of the previous slides, that did not work real well. So this was a structure that Iron County paid for in its entirety. It was not eligible for FEMA funds because we didn't have one in place prior to that. And it was not considered a mitigation effort in the marina project. So we decided to pay for this entirely on our own. And in the heavy rains we've had since it's been there, it works like a charm. We may be left with a little silt and sediment on it, but in a couple hours of cleanup with some brooms and a backhoe, it can be right back to clean and in shape again. So next slide, please. So here's a picture, a couple of side-by-side comparisons. They're almost from the same spot on County A. The one on the right is July 12th, the day after the flood. You're looking at the same bluff that you're looking at on the picture on the left. So a touch over 3 years, we went from boats underwater and complete devastation to a brand new bathroom facility, docks, transient dock, parking areas. It's a good side-by-side comparison. They're just about the same spot. Next slide, please. So the campground project really took off in the winter of 2020. Again, the bathroom and shower building for the campground was constructed during the winter months. They did a concrete work in the winter. Full construction continued in the beginning of May once road restrictions came off. There were some supply delays last year in 2020 because of COVID. So substantial completion was reached in mid-August. The original plan for substantial completion was around the 4th of July. So we were delayed about 6 weeks, and that primarily was from supply delays that were COVID related. We had our soft opening for the new campground in about the 3rd week of August last summer. And that is a picture in mid-construction here last summer. Next slide. So the Saxon Harbor project, it had multiple FEMA projects to it. The Upland Marina project, which primarily took care of all of the out-of-the-water structures in the marina, including roads, the spillway, the office, new playground equipment, fuel stations, all of those types of things. That project was a $4.1 million project. Our campground project was a $1.86 million project. Total projects, all projects combined to date, we spent a little over $3 million on engineering. And our total facility rebuild, including the highway, including our in-office time here, all of the different contracts, was just under $14.7 million. And this is a picture from this summer. So this is a completed facility. Next slide, please. Here's the breakdown of actual costs and our reimbursements and the different contractors. So like I said, a little under $14.7 million in our costs, and the breakdown of all the different funding sources we had. A lot of different partners in this for money and funding. Iron County share to date is $1.37 million. Currently, that FEMA WEM share down towards the bottom of $7.95 million. We've actually received about $4 million from FEMA and WEM to date, and we're waiting on the additional funding on the closeouts and the final closeouts with FEMA for the marina project. The interesting part is our insurance was capped based on our policy at $1.5 million. Turned out to be about $2.1 million worth of insurable damages. So we submitted the additional $600,000 to FEMA for cost sharing with them. And that remains to be seen on how much of that will be paid for. Yeah, I think that covers that one. Next slide, please. So here's a picture just before our grand opening. So the first week of June, the completed facility. We got boats in the marina. We have 81 seasonal slips, or 79 seasonal slips, sorry, 14 transient. To date, we're at about 72 slips rented. We only have a couple of 28-foot slips, and the rest are 24-foot slips, so small boat slips available. Campground has been doing really well. You can see that concrete spillway there on your left-hand side by the boat lift, and its design seems to work, like I say, really well with high floodwaters that we've had from some of these big rainstorms this summer. And then, of course, the Lake Superior shoreline is rip-wrapped there heavily with big rock, but that was part of earlier projects and not part of this project. Next slide, please. Anybody have any questions? Here's basically a reverse angle of it, and you can see that spillway and that concrete spillway and how that would work as water comes down that straight stretch of Oronto and can can spill into the marina. Okay, how was the cleanup process in 2016 initiated? And how were the different partners brought into the picture? It was initiated immediately by emergency management, and the forestry department. We were there immediately the next morning. Emergency management started coming in, Wisconsin Emergency Management, and then we went through the process to get the disaster declaration from the federal government. And I think that total amount for northern Wisconsin, for all of the counties involved in that original disaster, were 26 million, and we had almost 15 million of it here in Iron County. Once President Obama signed the disaster declaration, that brought FEMA to town. And then they really, in a lot of ways, they take the lead on that cleanup reconstruction process. And you quickly learn that FEMA doesn't pay to fix things. FEMA pays to put it back the way it was. And that's something that I learned the hard way. And I guess every time I see a disaster on TV and people say, where's FEMA to fix this? FEMA doesn't fix it. They put it back the way it was. That's what their funding is used for. And that's the laws they have to operate under. As far as the different partners that were brought into all of this, our department facilitated a lot of that because it's our Iron County facility, and you have to be your own cheerleader sometimes to keep the ball rolling and moving for your benefit. So a lot of the contacts were initially made by us to get people pulled together and say, hey, we need to get this taken care of.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. This has been a great overview. I'm going to go ahead and pop in with a question of my own, since I'm not seeing any more in the chat. Were there any lessons that you learned as you were doing this of something that might apply for somebody else who maybe doesn't run a marina, but they have some other public access on the coast? Anything that they should be considering to make their facilities more resilient? How can they learn from not only the disasters you've had, but also the recovery process?
I guess I can honestly say the biggest thing that I've learned through this whole process is to document absolutely everything when something starts happening. If you see you're having an issue, even if it's small, document that you're noticing this issue, because it might not be small enough to make a difference today or tomorrow, but 3 or 4 years from now, when there is a disaster or is there a potential for disaster, FEMA looks for documentation of previous issues. And in our case, we had flooding over our county road almost every summer. You'd get a quick 1-inch rainstorm, the water would come up fast in Toronto and it would flow over the highway. We didn't necessarily have that documented. That was normal everyday life. So when we relayed that information to FEMA, the first thing that they asked is, where's the documentation to show that? And I tell everybody that has anything to do with this stuff anymore is document everything. Even if you don't think it's significant, write it down, an internal memo in your office or somewhere that documents these things are potential concerns for your organization moving forward.
That is an excellent point. I really appreciate that. I see that we're almost at time, so I want to thank you so much, Eric, for joining us. I also want to thank our speakers from earlier, Becky Nicodemus and Brandon Kremwitty. And thank you, everyone, for taking some time out of your summer to join us today for our CHAOSS meeting. We really appreciate you being here. There are a lot of presentations and resources mentioned today. We're going to share all of that out to you, so don't worry if you didn't catch all the links. And just be sure to keep an eye out because we will have our next CHAOSS meeting in October, and we have some exciting speakers lined up. So thank you so much, and please reach out if you have any questions.